Yo, this is Bench Gamer here. So I'm going to be watching the over animation of Zenless Zone Zero by New Frame Plus. The New Frame Plus is like a video game animation critique commentary channel. I've seen some of his videos. I think this one was recommended to me a couple of times on my front page, but I never watched it because frankly I'm not really that interested in Zelda at this point. And yeah, I know about this channel's existence, but I just never watched any of his videos until today. And that was because I think it was either Reddit slash Gotcha Gaming or Reddit slash Games that recommended this channel to me on my push notifications. And I watched already maybe like around 5 to 8 minutes of this video. So this is not going to be an original reaction for some of it. And it wasn't up until like 8 minutes 32 seconds that I realized that I might want to make this a react video because this is more of a critique of how Zenless Zone Zero's animations are not as good as people say it is, or it's not like maybe that's maybe I'm putting words into his mouth. He puts it in a more mild form than I think I do. I'm probably gonna make like a really clickbaity title like Zenless Zone Zero's animations actually suck. And that is purely clickbait. I'm gonna be honest. If you want to see why I think that Zenless Zone Zero's animations actually suck, or why this video says it, that's probably not what this video actually says. But it is definitely more in the critique. It is definitely more of a critique side of things as to why Zenless Zone Zeros are not as good as people say they are. And I found that really interesting because Zenless Zone Zero's animations are actually what kind of convinced me that this game was different from the other Hoyoverse games. Like, let's be honest, when I first learned about Zenless Zone Zero, I actually wasn't that hyped up about it. If you watch my videos on ZZZ, you know that the animation style is one of the primary reasons why I think that this game feels and like just looks different, feels, looks, and plays different than any of the other games. It just has a completely different vibe from the other Hoyoverse games and even the other anime style games in general. So let's just watch this. Again, for the first 5 to 8 minutes, I've already seen this before. So let's just get to it.
Zenless Zone Zero contains a lot of animation, and I have a lot of nice things to say about it. Very few game studios are delivering on a 3D anime aesthetic at this level.
I don't think it's just very few studios. I feel like in this particular style, I've just never seen any studio do it this well, or this exaggerated, or like this hyper over the top animation. There is no other studio, in my opinion, right now that is doing what Zenless Zone Zero does for this genre of video games. Like maybe in a movie, like maybe Spider-Verse, I can see it. I think this game has a lot of similarities to Spider-Verse, at least on a surface level comparison. If seeing that movie, it's all like very exaggerated. There's a lot of very bright, garish colors. There's like a lot of bright splash art. I feel like if you've seen the leaks for Rappa from Honkai Star, it kind of looks like that. Rappa actually looks like a character that might just be out of Spider-Verse, right? But a lot of people also say that Rappa feels like a character from Zenless or from Natlan. And I definitely think that that is a style that they are deliberately going for. So yeah, it makes sense that it looks so different because it is different. And it now that we are seeing more Hoyoverse games also use the same animation style, or at least the same colors, the same vibes that Zenless has, then we're seeing more of it, and it's becoming more common. But up until the release of Zenless Zone Zero, I have never seen any other game. There is no Spider-Verse game. Maybe if they had a Spider-Verse game, I really want a Spider-Verse game on the same level as the PS5, the PS4 Spider-Man 1 and 2 games. But that hasn't happened yet, so this is the only game so far that I know of that has this same style. I don't think any other studio has it.
And I love that MiHoYo has clearly gone for a different
And
animation
I'm strictly talking about video games. I'm not talking about movies or animations or anime.
style this time around. It would be so easy for them to just stick with the house style they're already comfortable with, but they pushed outside their comfort zone on this one. And
I do think a lot of that has to do with the fact that this is a new studio, right? They have multiple studios within Hoyoverse Studios. So this is a new team. And from what I've heard, it's not like they don't share the same members as with all the other teams. So maybe this is a completely new team made of completely new people that they just recruited for Hoyoverse. And it doesn't have as much overlap with the other teams as, say, Genshin and Honkai Star or Honkai Impact Third. I would think that a lot of people working on Honkai Genshin Impact actually worked on Honkai Impact Third beforehand, right? Because they have to move over the people who have experience, right? So that's just my take, my informal take based on nothing.
applaud that. It really helps to visually set Zenless Zone Zero apart from the rest of their catalog. And I love how much this game is using animation as a major selling point. so many gacha games, even MiHoYo gacha games, lean predominantly on character design to drive appeal, with the animation on those characters generally being a secondary priority.
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. I would definitely say that Zenless Zone Zero's characters have much more variety in terms of their heights, in terms of their body proportions. But it's not like Genshin Impact. At the time that Genshin Impact came out, it was driving the premier game in terms of gacha games when it came to animations and character design, because they were actually fully 3D characters. I think Genshin Impact being less like diverse compared to having less variety compared to Zenless Zone Zero is just a function of when it came out and the developments that they have made since then. It's not like Genshin Impact deliberately said, no, we're going to be a lesser version of Zenless when it came to character models or character animations. No, it's just that they literally did not. That was their first major game that broke across international barriers, that became an international hit. They didn't have the budget, they didn't have the tech, they didn't have the experience back then to make, characters that look and feel the way that they do in Zenless.
But they are clearly going harder with animation this time, and I am here for it. Also, the combat gameplay animation in this game looks so absurdly cool. Look at this. This is very likely showing up in my Best of the Year roundup for 2024. I think it is easily MiHoYo's best gameplay animation work to date. There is so much to praise here, but at the same time, I think there are also some worthwhile animation critiques to be made, and they're the sort of critiques that I usually, and understandably, don't see happening within gaming fandom very often. To put it simply, Zenless Zone
I
Zero—
don't remember seeing this cutscene in the actual game. What the heck?
Animation critiques.
Is it just me? I don't remember this. Was this actually in the game? Wait. Have I just memory hold this entire thing? This was a trailer only animation cutscene, I believe. Anyways,
within gaming
moving
fandom
on.
very often. To put it simply, Zenless Zone Zero has an over-animation problem. Over-animation is a tricky thing to explain because it's the kind of nebulous aesthetic critique that usually only gets discussed in animation classrooms or among animation peers, but I will try my best. In the broadest terms possible, over-animation is motion without purpose, and that can take a lot of forms. Sometimes it's animation which includes tons of superfluous movement or distracting visual noise. Sometimes it's an animator trying to squeeze 5 key poses into a shot which really only needs 2. Sometimes it's hammy acting animation that pantomimes emotions rather than depicting a character genuinely feeling them. Sometimes it's just an animator using every single animation principle they know at all times.
I did feel like at first, I think this has some merit in that when I first started watching the cutscenes and trailers for Zenless, I did feel like it was a bit hard to keep up with all the things that were happening on the screen at the same time. Like maybe in this cutscene, for example, maybe it could have just focused on Nicole first before Billy, because they're all doing things at the same time. I remember in drama class when we were acting out the different scenes, the teacher would tell us to like just focus on one thing. Like if one part of the scene is talking, then another part of the scene should not be talking. Like you're just background noise at that point, right? You just need to be in the background. You're not supposed to be the focus. 2 people talking at the same time in 2 different parts of the scene is not a good thing. So when I first started watching this, I did eventually get used to it.
But I will try.
And I feel like as the game goes on, it became less of the case. Like I don't feel like the recent Jane animations, especially in the recent cutscenes, there was definitely more focus on Jane, if only because there were less characters, right? Because the new Jane story was mostly just Jane and Seth, so there weren't as many characters such as the cunning hares to focus on. Every time the cunning hares are on screen, it feels like they're all on screen. And the same thing with the Victoria housekeeping service. When they're on screen, they're all on screen. And there's very few times in these cutscenes where there's just 1 or 2 characters doing their thing, is what I feel like contributes to this problem of over animation. There's just like too many characters on screen. You almost never have this happen in Genshin Impact, because Genshin Impact has very few actual character interactions in a cutscene. It's always just like the Traveler and X or Y character. It's always just Traveler and Nilou. It's always just Traveler and Wanderer, and maybe sometimes Zenhida. You don't really get these squads of characters except for like the most hype cutscenes at the end of a story. For example, during the battle with Ozio.
Best. In the broadest terms possible, over-animation is motion without purpose. And that can take a lot of forms. Sometimes it's animation which includes tons of superfluous movement or distracting visual noise. Sometimes it's an animator trying to squeeze 5 key poses into a shot which really only needs 2.
So what I was getting at with that, I don't think I made my point across. I feel like it's okay when it's just like a lot of animation in just one character on the screen at the same time. 2 characters is okay as well, maybe. But when it gets to like 3 or 4 characters, which I feel like Zenless Zone Zero does sometimes, it can be a bit too much on the eyes, especially when everybody is moving at the exact same time.
Sometimes it's hammy acting animation that pantomimes emotions.
I think this is
rather
alright
than
though.
depicting
This
a
is
character.
Final Fantasy X or Final Fantasy X2, I believe. Is this Final Fantasy X2? I love this game. This is my favorite Final Fantasy game, by the way. I know this is going to be a hot take, but Final Fantasy X2 is the one that I have the most nostalgia for. Maybe it just has because it has hot girls. Maybe that's it. Maybe that was a prelude to my my current predicament with gacha games.
Pantomimes emotions rather than depicting a
Yeah,
character.
I think all these
genuinely
animations are
feeling
fine.
them. Sometimes it's just an animator using every single animation principle they know at all times on every movement, whether that principle is called for or not. Big arcs on every single part of the body. Big exaggerated anticipation and squash and stretch and overlap everywhere. This is a thing that you'll often see in the work of animation students. They're learning what all of these principles and techniques are, but they haven't yet developed the intuition for how or where to use those techniques most effectively. So they just kind of use them all over the place at maximum volume. We have all done this at one point, probably lots of times. Even among professionals, it is very common. The simple truth is, more animation is not always the same thing as better animation. Like, of course it's
My
not.
gut feeling when I first saw this, because I've already watched like 8 minutes of this, by the way. My gut feeling for this statement is that this is absolutely true. However, I don't think it is true for Zenless Zone Zero, because I feel like the purpose of all the over animation in Zenless is the fact that it is over animated, so to speak. But let's just keep watching. That was my gut feeling when I first saw this statement. More animation is not the same thing as better animation. I think that is definitely true, except for Zenless.
That would be like saying great film editing is about squeezing in the most cuts per minute, or that more notes per measure equals
Was
better
that
music
Jailbreak or Prison? Was that Prison?
minute, or that more
The-
notes per measure equals
something.
better
I
music
can see
composition. Sure, lots of
can
notes
see the title.
can be great, but the rests between them are just as important. Now, to some of you, this might sound like the sort of criticism that's really more of a subjective opinion. I mean, different animated projects can have very
I don't think it's just subjective. I think there definitely is an overstimulation problem with some animations. Zenless Zone Zero is not immune to this. I just think that the overstimulation might not actually be a bad thing.
different styles and tones, right? Isn't this just a question of personal?
Like I think it is an objective fact that sometimes there can be overstimulation. Like you literally cannot focus on this all the things on the screen at the same time and understand what is going on. But maybe that overstimulation could be an effect that is used effectively, is what I'm saying. Like maybe they want you to be overstimulated. It's like maybe at the end of a gameplay section or a section of dialogue, you have this like, oh my god, this hype, blood pumping, adrenaline rushing, like super overactive animated cutscene, and you're like, holy shit, this was all worth it. Sitting through 40 minutes of dialogue was totally worth it. It wasn't, by the way. But I can see what they're going for when they make a cutscene so animated that you're like, oh, that was totally worth the last 40 minutes of going through this NPC quest. I'm talking about Genshin.
or creative taste. And to an extent, you're right. What over-animation looks like is going to vary from project to project, and animation which might look way too exaggerated in one context may feel just right in another. But it's also important to remember that it is very possible to execute on a chosen style poorly. And there are fundamentals of animation craft which continue to apply regardless of one style. Still, it can be pretty hard to recognize over-animation without experience and a trained eye. And even then, not all animators will agree. What I'm trying to say here is that the stuff I'm going to talk about in this video is not a facet of animation quality which can be easily measured in consistent, objective terms. So instead, we get to dive into the weeds of peer critique.
Welcome to hell.
You are now entering Nitpick Land. Population, insufferable.
Oh boy.
Welcome to New Frame Plus. Just
Peer
so
reviews.
everyone can get their
Every
bearings, let me
university
give you a quick
students
tour
and
of Zenless
undergraduate
Zone
and graduate
Zero's
students'
character
worst
animation
nightmare.
contents. The majority of the game's animation exists across a few specific modes: combat, exploration, menus, conversation sequences, and cinematics. Combat is the game's most animation-intensive mode, and by far the most successful. It is so good. Every playable character has a unique move set. The action is all quite over the top, but in a good way. It looks good, it feels good.
To be honest, I'm more impressed with the cutscenes than I am with the combat animations. Like, the combat animations are really good, but I feel like the combat animations are slightly less unique than the cutscenes because I've already seen them before in like fighting games. I feel like the battle animations are very, very good, and they obviously mimic fighting games in how animated they are. They are absolutely the best when it comes to gacha games, but they are not unique within the spectrum of video games in general, in my opinion. Which is why I feel a bit more impressed by the cutscenes, because they're so over animated, as this person says, that they feel completely unique in video games in general. Like, I have never seen cutscenes on the same level of over animatedness as another game. Not just in gacha games, but in video games as a whole.
It delivers on flashy anime action spectacle without sacrificing gameplay clarity, and it gives each character a chance to show off what makes them uniquely special. This is all excellent. No notes. Please keep doing what you are doing. There's also exploration, where you can wander these little hub areas, visit shops, and talk to NPCs. The animation here mostly consists of your character's locomotion and a bunch of ambient background activity. Plus a bunch of little cute touches thrown in, like the way this little thing runs security at the door to your back room. I don't know why, I
was so confused by this. Like, this one looks exactly the same as the one on the counter. The one at the counter is 18, so we've got another similar one over here, and then you've got another EOS over here somewhere in the back of this room. So it's like 3 different bamboos that all look relatively similar. I was really confused. I was like, is this another Catherine? Are they teleporting across the room all the time?
Love this little guy so much. There's also quite a lot of character animation when navigating menus, whether you are unlocking new characters in the gacha machine, or fiddling with their loadouts, or
Oh
sometimes
yeah,
just
this animation, the polling animation, is probably the best animation when it comes to... I would say this is extremely subjective as well, but the amount of like extra stuff they have going on in the background with this like sound stage that they have, oh my god, this looks so epic. In terms of like how... I would say Wuthering Waves is also very good as well. And when Honkai Star Rail came out, that animation was also pretty sick. I feel like with every new... Maybe this is just recency bias. I feel like every single new gacha game that comes out has more and more high polling animations. And I wonder if at some point you're going to reach like a threshold, a limit, where it's like, okay, it doesn't matter how epic it becomes, it's just a polling animation. It's not getting my adrenaline pumping anymore.
or fiddling with their loadouts, or sometimes just as a bit of background activity. I very much like the way that your characters shift to different poses in these submenus. It's very stylish, very Persona. It's very...
Another thing you've noticed with these like switches is that when you switch from base stats to skills, it has one animation, and then when you switch from equipment to skills, it has another animation. So they found a new way to switch to have, instead of having 3 different poses, they had 4 different poses, which is just so insane to me. It's like they made it super extra on purpose.
Then, when you are playing through the campaign, you will experience most of the game's story in these simple conversation sequences / awkward Zoom calls. Each of the characters have a handful of mood poses they'll shift between from line to line, a handful of expressions. They're basically a 3D incarnation of those character portraits you often see in RPGs or visual novels. And then, on rare occasion, when it's time for some action or a new character introduction, you will be shown a fully animated and very flashy cinematic. Now, I think that there are some minor examples of over-animation scattered across all of these modes. Like, this floaty, keep-alive motion they constantly put on these characters anytime they have to hold a pose is very...
You know what's weird about this? Let's just... Okay, I'm a bit too early. Because I've already seen this before, by the way. I've already seen up to like 8 minutes and 32 seconds. So I've already seen this critique before. Let's just go over this again.
Anytime they have to hold a pose is very swimmy. Now, I do get why it is here. A complete lack of motion would be worse. It would just make them feel dead. And using lots of flapping...
Okay, so the thing about this is that before he pointed it out, I had absolutely no problem with this. And then he pointed it out, and I was like, why the fuck is her hair moving all the time? So maybe if I didn't watch this video, I would unironically like Zenless's animation more. But now that he's pointed it out, it's like, why is her hair just moving on its own? And none of the other people's hair moves like that.
just make them feel dead. And using lots of...
Like, it makes sense that Bella's hair is moving because her head is moving. But the way that her long ponytails move, it doesn't make sense based on how much her head is moving. So there has to be like some kind of like air blower all around her at the same time for her hair to move like that.
Feel dead. And using lots of flapping motion on hair and clothes to keep otherwise static characters feeling alive is, like, that's anime aesthetic 101. Even so, I don't love this execution. It's one
Here,
thing
I think it makes sense because she's like sitting down.
having that floaty, drifting texture on loose extremities, but having it on the character's torso and center of gravity just makes them feel weightless. It looks like every character's trying to hold a pose while submerged in a wave pool.
I feel like that's just basic, like, idol poses. I feel like that's just basic idol poses, to be honest. I don't really get this criticism. Like, yes, it does feel weird that they are all moving in their idol animation at the same time, but I also have the same critique for Honkai Star when they're all just standing in a circle and then they just go through their idol animation, their breathing animation. You know what I'm talking about, right? They just go like, their chests go up and down, their shoulders move slightly, their head bobs up and down as well. That sort of animation is just the problem that I have in general. It's a problem with having it go through a pattern that you find recognizable, that you see over and over again. I don't think in a vacuum this would be a problem, but I don't think this is also something that can be realistically fixed. Like the alternative to this would be just a static pose, as this person said. But like, it doesn't really matter to me at the end of the day. This is like, again, he said that this was a super nitpicky video, and this is probably where he gets this super nitpicky stuff. But like, what are you supposed to do about this is what I'm wondering.
Pose while submerged in a wave pool. And I'd level some similar criticisms at the application of real-time physics on these characters across the entire game. Having some dynamic...
These aren't real-time physics, by the way. All of these animations are the exact same every single time. They are handcrafted animations. There is no real-time physics in this game. Things don't like... The physics doesn't react. Like when the hair of a character touches another object, they don't move in real time. They don't like, oh, I bumped into this something, then I'm going to move in this different way, versus if like I bumped into another thing. These aren't real-time physics.
Overlap and follow through on your character.
Like that, those boob physics aren't based on some kind of engine work that is happening in real time. This is all completely hand animated.
Hair and jackets.
Or at least it's animated in a way that is not based on some kind of overarching system. This is like, they probably motion captured it to some degree. Probably not the boobs, because I don't think real boobs move like that, but you get what I mean.
Jiggly
like
bits.
All these movements, I don't think that these are physics that they just did. This is sculpted, this is handcrafted, this is like they made it move in this specific way. There's no way that this is based on, like, these boobs aren't moving because they made the physics system think, oh, boobs move this way, so boobs go boing boing boing. No, that's not how it works.
Jackets and jiggly bits is good. It helps them feel organic, but this is a lot. And I'm not even specifically talking about the fan servicey aspect either. Horniness aside, the large amount of overlap on every single clump of hair or loose bit of clothing on these characters layers a significant amount of white noise motion on top of everything these characters do, especially if they're moving a lot.
Again, I had no idea that this was happening until he pointed it out. So I'm wondering if I didn't watch this video, would I just enjoy Genshin? Like, would I enjoy Zenless more if I didn't watch this video? Because all of this seems supernatural to me before he pointed it out. And then I'm like specifically looking at all the ways that the character moves, rather than just looking at the whole thing. I feel like I'm specifically looking at like individual details now when he points it out. Like, what is he talking about? What does he mean by all the things are floaty? And then you start noticing, oh, the hair is constantly moving and the shoulders are moving.
This brings me to the game's cinematics, which contain, I think, the game's biggest animation problems. And as I say that, I imagine some of you probably think I am out of my mind. And I can understand that, because look at this. Are these shots not filled with the kind of stylized, exaggerated animation I am so often praising on this channel? Heck, a significant number of the tens of millions of people who have played Zenless Zone Zero probably downloaded the game in the first place.
The thing is that the animation he is showing right here is probably one of the least over-animated parts of this game, because it's only showing two playable characters instead of 3 or 4. So when you're looking at the animations for these NPCs, it doesn't feel over the top to me at all. It just feels like they're like side characters you're not supposed to focus too much on.
Because look at this.
Like, he obviously is very exaggerated in the way that he responds to the things that are happening on the screen.
Are these shots not
And the way that they're moving also doesn't feel too over
filled with
exaggerated.
the kind of stylized, exaggerated animation?
Except for this, I think this is okay too, because again, it's just one subject on the screen. You're not focusing on too many things at the same time. I think this is okay.
So often praising on this channel? Heck, a significant
And then
number
it slowly pans out to show all the different characters, poses and stuff like that. And then the focus of attention is transferred from the NPCs to the playable characters.
of the tens of millions of people who have played Zenless Zone Zero.
Again, he might just
downloaded
be showing stock footage, but I feel like this is probably one of the worst examples of over animation that he's talking about. Because I can definitely see a lot of other pieces of like cutscenes that he could have used. This one in particular, I just don't think is that good.
Tens of millions of people who have played Zenless Zone Zero probably downloaded the game in the first place because they saw how cool the animation in these cinematics looks.
Yeah, this one is
and
much
I get
more
it because there is a lot of cool looking
what
animation
he's talking about,
here.
I believe.
These action sequences
But even
are
here, it's
so
not that
fun
bad
to
compared
look
to...
at. Like, you could
Even
make...
here, I don't think it's that bad compared to what he's talking about. He could have shown like the cutting hair animations. I feel like the cutting hairs are much more like the cutting hairs, and even maybe the Victoria housekeeping party is not housekeeping. Victoria keeping. I can't say their name. Whatever they're called, Victoria people. Every time there is like an entire squad on the screen at the same time, I feel like that is the most amount of what he is actually talking about. One-on-one fighting scene, I feel like is just okay as well.
Here. These action sequences are so fun to look at. Like, you could make a fair argument for this being empty eye candy, the animation equivalent of style over substance, but while I do fully agree that there is a very important difference between great character animation and animation which just looks eye-catching and cool, I also think that it's okay to just enjoy style for style's sake sometimes, especially when that style's being delivered at an exceptionally high level of skill. Anime action is fun spectacle, and I legitimately think Zenless Zone Zero delivers on that brand of 3D anime spectacle better than most. For me, the issues start when that style over substance approach starts bleeding into characters' acting, because that is where over-animation has the potential to cause much more significant problems. So let's talk about problems.
The problem with this statement, though, I think this is around where I stopped. I think, yeah, this is basically where I stopped. The problem with this, though, is that almost all of the scenes that he's talking about, like all the cutscenes in Zenless Zone Zero are action scenes. It's not like Genshin Impact. I feel like Genshin Impact has much more like these toned down, low-key emotional moments compared to Zenless. But every time you see a cutscene in Zenless, it's almost always action. I can't even remember off the top of my head a cutscene that wasn't just action. I think the only one I can remember off the top of my head was at the end of Act 1, where like Fairy was being injected into our fucking brain. That was the only time when I remember a low-key emotional moment that was not just action. It was like, oh my god, what is happening? Bella and Wise are staring at each other in this like black and white world with the Hollow Zero in the background, and it's exploding and expanding and it's swallowing up of Eridu. I think that was the only time where I was like, what the heck is this? This is so different from everything else. Everything else is so animated, and this is like a very emotional, like horrific moment that is going on. Is it happening in the future? Is it happening in the past? I have no idea. And I think that scene definitely got its point across in a very effective way compared to because it was so different from the rest of the game. But everything else is just like, everything he is showing is literally action cutscenes. There are no, all the non-action cutscene moments, like the emotional moments, are in this part. It's like in the parts where you are talking to each other in a visual novels format. I think that is the problem, which is that all of the cutscenes, I feel like he would be much less, like this would be much less of a problem if they actually animated the emotional moments and the character interaction moments, so to speak, that weren't just action. But unfortunately, I'm not even sure if it's unfortunately, right? Because this is definitely on purpose. They definitely choose to focus on the action cutscenes more than the character interaction. The character interaction cutscenes where they're not fighting, I think is only, like, it's almost always just Bella and Wise. That's the only two characters that get these cutscene moments with each other that don't have any fighting going on whatsoever. I wonder if he shows those moments. No, I think I'm right. I think that it's always just action cutscenes. Even when this little girl, I forgot what her name is. I think it was like I forgot her name. Damn. Basically, the chainsaw girl. Even the part where she meets Nekomata, she actually cuts through the door of a train, and I was like, wow, holy shit. That was the highlight of that part of the cutscene. It wasn't the fact that this kid meets another kid. It was the part that she cuts through the train because that was so cool. That was so hype. It was like, oh my god, this little kid is crazy. She's got a chainsaw. And before it's revealed that it's the little kid, you're wondering what is going on behind that train. Is it like a monster or something? Of course you know it's not because you've already seen the trailers and you know what is going to happen. But still, I think that part was pretty effective.
Problems. The character performances in these cinematics tend to be very animated, very exaggerated, and that's not inherently bad at all. I really do want to stress I am a fan of what they are attempting to do here. In execution, though, a lot about this attempt is falling short. There are a lot of stock animation and acting cliches to be found in these performances. A lot of characters pantomiming emotions, rather than expressing them. Now, to be fair, anime is an art that thrives on tropes and archetypes, and that's fine. There is nothing inherently bad or flawed about using a trope. But when it comes to animated acting, leaning too hard into the performance cliches associated with those tropes can be a problem. And some of these shots are like watching an acting cliche speedrun. Like, how many moe poses can you
Okay,
squeeze?
this part, I think is true. But I also think it's necessary for gacha games because there's so few moments when you actually get to see their emotions being acted out that you need these very stereotypical, archetypical moments to actually get an idea of what the character is all about. Because like besides this one cutscene and this like one other cutscene, Anton basically just disappears from the story. And Zenless Zone Zero already does this so much better than all the other gacha games because they actually have interaction moments like with the relationship system outside of the cutscenes. In Genshin Impact, outside of the cutscenes and in the story quest, once you're done with that, you basically just never see the characters again. So when they actually do show up in a cutscene, you will have to get across their stereotype. Their stereotype has to be gotten across so effectively that there is no way that you don't understand what this archetype of character is going to be, what their personality is. If you don't understand what this character is all about within maybe like the first 5 to 10 seconds of seeing this character in a cutscene, they have failed at their job because you are never seeing that character again. You are never seeing Anton again in another cutscene unless it's like some kind of hyper like filler event where like this whole patch is about that one event, and that one event is about the Belobog construction team. Unless that happens, I don't think that we are going to see Anton very much in the future. And again, Zenless Zone Zero already does this so much better than other games because there is much more crossover between the characters than say a game like Genshin Impact, where everything is separated by region. So I can see the validity of this point, but at the same time, it's like if they don't get across this archetype right away with this cutscene, within this one cutscene, then they will never get across what this character is about because you are never going to see this character in another cutscene ever again.
Flawed about using a trope. But when it comes to animated acting, leaning too hard into the performance cliches associated with those tropes can be a problem. And some of these shots are like watching an acting cliche speedrun.
It is a speedrun. That's exactly what this is. He's gotten it right at the same time, but at the same like he is right at the same time as well as missing why it happens like this. It's because these are gacha games, right? These characters have only limited relevance. A standard character like Nekomata, outside of this one cutscene, she's never. I hope she shows up again, and she does in like maybe 1 or 2 scenes, but she's never the focus in those scenes. Outside of the first act, the prelude of Zenless Zone Zero, I'm not sure she's ever going to get another cutscene ever again. So she has to act super cat-like. She has to be acting like the most stereotypical cat person of all time. Because this is what a whole bunch of fan fiction, a whole bunch of fan art is going to be based off of. You have to get across that fact that she is a cat. Every single person who draws fan art of Nekomata is going to be thinking about this scene for the rest of their lives.
And you squeeze into 5 seconds.
This one scene.
These acting issues are further exacerbated by the overly enthusiastic use of exaggeration. Exaggeration is one of the 12 fundamental principles of animation. I'll get around to making a video dedicated to it someday, but to give the short version, exaggeration is about pushing the movement and posing in your animation beyond realism in order to maximize its clarity, personality, or visual appeal. It's a very important element in all animation, anime very much included. And given the game's comedic tone, it makes complete stylistic sense for Zenless Zone Zero to lean into using exaggeration more heavily. But as with all of the animation principles, execution...
One thing I will say about this exaggerated movement, though, is that I feel like it's coming to all the other Hoyoverse games. Like, again, if you've seen... I don't know if I mentioned this, but if you've seen the leaked animations for Rappa, like, that just looks like something that could come out of Zenless Zone Zero. If you've seen some of the aspects of Natlan, for Shalonen, for even Mualani, even the fan animation, not the fan animation, but the animation that we saw during the live stream, where they use very Zenless-like colors. I feel like this art style is coming to the other Hoyoverse games as well, at least specifically to the parts that we have been shown most recently. And I'm not sure if that's a good thing, because it feels like Zenless Zone Zero is becoming less unique, a tiny bit less unique, once all of the other Hoyoverse games get clues in on the fact that people like the way that this game is animated.
Matters, and frankly, there is a lot of exaggeration in these shots in places.
So if it's like exaggerated here, I think it works for Zenless Zone Zero, but if all the other games start doing it, then it's no longer as unique and as cool.
Is where it doesn't really belong. Exaggerating the movement in a high-energy action shot or a comedic double take is one thing, but even casual conversation in these scenes is so often given these big exaggerated arcs, exaggerated anticipation, exaggerated overlap. These are important animation principles, yes, but it's important for the animator to also know where they aren't needed. Even when you are working within an exaggerated style, if you are hitting every single line at maximum energy and emotion, the resulting performance is going to feel less sincere, and also just be kind of exhausting to look at after a while.
It is exhausting. Remember, I think I said this before at some point, but I was really more so the scenes with multiple characters, but even here it does feel like a lot of stuff is going on, and the characters are so bendy and so stretched that sometimes I have no idea what action they're trying to do. It's just like they're being extra over the top for the sake of being over the top. The difference between me and this critique, though, is that I feel like being over the top is the purpose of being over the top. It can't just be something be like unto itself. The purpose of being over the top is to be over the top. It doesn't need an extrinsic reason to justify itself. Sometimes just being something, like being very hype, being very animated, can be itself a purpose, because it is different. And it has achieved, Zenless Zone Zero has achieved being different from other games simply by being so over the top that no other game is like it. And I think there is value in being different compared to just being good across all things. It doesn't have to be good across all different types of animation, because I feel like for example, an Ubisoft game is very good. Assassin's Creed games are some of the best games on the market. It is some of the best animated games of all time. It has some of the best physics of all time. But do we really need another Assassin's Creed game is basically what I'm saying. Like, do we need another game that is just hitting all of these scores across multiple different like spectrums of rating and rubrics or criteria that they are using? No, it doesn't. I feel like being different is a quality that is more valid and is more beneficial now in this market than just being good, because I think even Wuthering Waves scores very high across almost all spectrums of rating that you could give it, except for maybe story and performance. But everything else, it scores very high in my opinion. The open world doesn't look terrible. Like, from a technical perspective, it looks pretty good. From a technical perspective, from an animation perspective, the animations for the combat looks very good. The characters look very good. Everything looks very good. But when you actually look at the cutscenes, in my opinion, you could tell me that this was a spin-off. You could tell me that Wuthering Waves was a spin-off for a Final Fantasy game, and I would believe you. When you look at a Zenless Zone Zero animation, no matter what animation it is, or what cutscene, even here, you can very obviously tell, despite the generic anime graphics, that the way that this character is animated, this is a Zenless Zone cutscene. This is not Final Fantasy or Trails of Legends or whatever like other JRPG cutscene that you're seeing. This is specifically Zenless Zone Zero, and I think that is more beneficial for brand awareness and like recognizability than simply being, oh, this is a good animation. Because being a good animation, it's like the same principle as working harder doesn't actually make you more. It doesn't actually result in a benefit that a proportional benefit. Like making this a better animation based on the principles of not over animating it doesn't actually make this a better game in terms of profitability and recognizability. Is my point.
Some of these shots almost look like those TikToks you see of people imitating the
I've seen
movement.
this so much. I feel like a lot of people think that Zenless Zone Zero is targeting towards Zoomers, but I actually feel the opposite because these over animated. I feel like the way that these characters are over animated is much less like TikTok than it is like early 2000s anime. The way that there are like certain scenes that are over animated. The difference is that everything in Zenless is over animated. It is a facsimile. It is like an over exaggerated facsimile and copy of what early 2000s to like late 2000s anime were like in very specific shots. But the difference is that in those specific shots, that only happened in very specific shots for like Western cartoons because it was too cost prohibitive to make all of the animation look like that. So I feel like he does have a point that the animations that Zenless is copying from, like cribbing from, don't actually do this. But I'm not sure if they didn't do this type of animation because they didn't want to. It might have just been because of a limit of the technical requirements and limitations at the time that they were making these animes and cartoons, rather than because they didn't want to.
And also just be kind of exhausting to look at after a while. Some of these shots almost look like those TikToks you see of people imitating the movement of animated
I'm
code.
not a TikTok person, so I have no idea if this is true. But yeah, this is like a real life version of Billy. This is a real life version of Billy if he was a female human.
To be clear, I like these. What these creators are doing is really impressive. But if you're an animator, and this might sound counterintuitive, you generally don't want your animated acting to resemble this. Because the thing is, these performers are themselves already doing an exaggerated imitation. They are imitating recognizable cliches about the ways we've all seen animated characters.
And I feel like Hoyoverse does this too much. I think this is a criticism that really resonates with me because even though you know that Zenless Zone Zero is cribbing and copying from these other types of content, like you've probably heard about the drama of certain trailers for Honkai Impact Third that were cribbing off of the opening theme of Freerin or some other opening theme of Evangelion, and you can say that these are homages, that these are references or honorable, like an honorable form of copying. But when you do it all the time, it does feel like, oh my god, is this going to be another reference to My Little Pony in the recent event of Honkai Star Rail? I just did the recent event, by the way, and it was absolutely like the My Little Pony Power Friendship shit. Like everything is just a reference. And some people, that might gel with some people, like this guy's saying, but for a lot of other people, it's like, yikes, is this entire game just a reference to something else? I wish this was more of a unique thing. And I think this is definitely the most subjective part of like this video so far, which is that for some people, being a reference to something else might be a good thing. You might just want your game to be a reference to something else that you enjoy. But for a lot of other people, for myself, I don't like collabs. I don't like the fact that Fate Stay Night the Fate series is going to be part of Honkai Star Rail by the end of next year. That's just an entirely me thing. There are a lot of other people who enjoy Fate. I respect those people. I think for those people, this Fate collab is going to be amazing. But putting Fate in Honkai Star Rail does really nothing for me. It's not even that I dislike Fate. I actually enjoy Fate Unlimited Blade Works a lot. I enjoy Fate Zero a lot. Fate Stay Night is the complete dog crap, but I guess at the time it came out, it wasn't too bad. So it's not like I don't enjoy Fate. It's just that I don't really enjoy that type of, like, I don't enjoy crossovers as much as other people do for any sort of content.
Act. So if the
Okay, that's a lie. Maybe if Zenless had a collab with Street Fighter, I might enjoy that.
performances you're animating resemble an exaggerated imitation of a cliche, that's probably not a good sign. And these over-animation issues are not helped by the faces in these cinematics. For some reason, there is a noticeable mismatch in the level of exaggeration being applied to the body compared to the facial expressions. Anime faces have incredible capacity for emotional expression, from the extreme to the subtle. And these expressions just aren't fully delivering at either end of that spectrum.
I disagree. I feel like Zenless Zone Zero's facial animations are actually the most animated and the most expressive out of not just like Hoyoverse games, but just like anime style games in general. I've never actually seen. I've actually I feel completely disagree. I feel like this part,
An
the part with
exaggerated
Kaleda,
imitation of a cliche, that's probably not a good sign. And these
again, these are all in-engine animations, right? All of these, you've probably noticed stuttering, at least I have, during the cutscenes for Zenless Zone Zero. It's because these aren't like hard-baked cutscenes. They are not just showing you like a JPEG version of the cutscene with like, it's not like an AMV or like an MKB video. This is literally all in-engine. They are showing you an in-engine version of the game that is basically a cutscene. So these models are all the same models that you would just play as. So I guess that could be an excuse to use. But even then, I feel like they squish and stretch the face so much that I absolutely do get an idea of what they are expressing, even when one of her eyes is covered
by the faces in these cinematics.
Like she's doing a scowl there.
For some reason, there is a noticeable mismatch in the level of exaggeration.
Maybe I'm just so used to gacha game animations and cutscenes at this point that like any sort of expression for me is better than no expression. But it's like, what other anime style games have better expressions than Zenless? I don't know. I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Being applied to the body.
Like these animations, these expressions just feel like what expressions should look like in anime style games, to be honest. Maybe they could be a bit more expressive with the eyes, like maybe change the eyes a bit more. Like sometimes they could have X's or O's or something. But other than that, like just extremely stylized ways to express what anime style faces can be. Other than that, like the way that they do it in mangas and sometimes in animes, other than that, I'm not sure what they could do to make the faces more expressive. Or is he talking about the fact that the body is not as expressive as the face? Maybe I just misheard him.
Compared to the facial expressions, anime faces have incredible capacity for emotional expression.
Yeah, like this.
From the
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Other than doing stuff like this, like you completely change the eyes. Her eyes are green here.
Incredible capacity for
and they became just a dark pupil here. Other than that, like how are you supposed to make them more expressive? Like I guess they could do it in Zenless. Maybe they have at some point, but that's like that's like an extreme distortion of what the model is. And since all of this is in engine, I think it would be pretty hard to just turn their eyes into completely something else like this. The way that it happens here in this anime is extremely natural, but I feel like in game it would be like that would definitely be something that stands out versus what is happening here. In animes, this is extremely natural because it's just so accepted at this point.
Emotional expression, from the extreme to the subtle. And these expressions just aren't fully delivering at either end of that spectrum. And then there's the issue of clarity. In their attempt to infuse these scenes with more rapid, over-the-top energy, which is then further amplified by the real-time physics causing every movement to cascade down every loose or bouncy extremity these characters have, the animators have filled a lot of these shots with unnecessarily distracting motion, a near constant barrage of visual noise. Good animation, like good cinematography, directs your eye. It uses motion to draw your focus to specific places in the frame, uses stillness where necessary to avoid distracting that focus, or sometimes to give your eyes a chance to absorb a visual before it changes. And these cinematics...
Notice how when he shows these shots, they almost always only have a single character in these shots. Like here, you only have Jinx. Here, you only have these two characters, and the focus is on this character. I forgot her name. I've watched this so many times, but I forgot her name. Here, you only have Buzz, more Buzz. And then all of these characters don't matter. They're basically NPCs. And then you get Buzz exploding like this. And the focus is on Buzz. All of these characters, there's only one focus. Here, there's like multiple focuses. It's like you've got Nicole, and then you've got Eos.
Animators have filled a lot of these shots with unnecessary...
I think this is not Eos. That's not Eos. But here, you've got like multiple focuses. You've got Nekomata, and then you've got Bella over here. They're all both very animated.
Distracting motion, a near constant barrage of visual noise. Good animation, like good cinematography, directs your eye. It uses motion to draw.
But I don't think, like, even then, I feel like he makes a very a bad job of showing the parts where this is actually the case. I think this one could qualify as one of the shots that are extremely over animated, but then you have clarity. But then you have this shot where there's only one character on the screen at the same time. And then I know he's just showing different shots of the cutscenes he's seen, because what else are you going to show? You've got to fill up this video somehow, right? This is what I would do during like a very edited video. I would just show like random shots but it doesn't do a very good job. I know what he's talking about, but it's just like the shots he's showing are not doing a very good job of showing what the over animation he is talking about is happening.
To infuse these scenes with more rapid...
Like, even though this part is very over animated, there's only Billy on the screen, so it's not really that bad. I never felt really put off by any of this.
over-the-top energy, which is then further amplified by the real-time physics causing...
This here is probably the most applicable one. The most applicable part he's talking about, because there's all these characters are moving at the same time. It's the entire Cutting Hairs faction.
Every movement to
except for Nicole. Nicole's not here.
Down
and they're all doing their little mannerisms at the same time. This one is also kind of the same. This one is a bit better, but it's Nicole as well as Eos at the same time. And then you've got Billy in the background, still doing his thing, moving. Ambi is the only one who's not really
extremity
moving.
These characters have, the animators have filled a lot of these shots with unnecessarily distracting motion, a near constant barrage of visual noise. Good animation, like good cinematography, directs your eye. It uses motion to draw your focus to specific places in the frame, uses stillness where necessary to avoid distracting that focus, or sometimes to give your eyes a chance to absorb a visual before it changes. And these cinematics, in their eagerness to pack in stylish motion, are frequently sabotaging their own ability to do that. I saw another animator describe all of this over-animation as the equivalent of jangling keys at a baby, which is a little harsher than I'd have put it, but I mean, yeah, a little bit. Even within a heavily exaggerated and stylized aesthetic,
I will say though, for a gacha game, jangling keys across the eyes of a baby is exactly what you want to do, right? You want to jangle the most jingly, most shiny keys of all time across the baby's eyes, because we are being treated as babies. We are treated as very what's the word for that? We are being treated as very irresponsible little kids, is what we're being treated like. They want us to be the most irresponsible kids of all time. They want to show us a shiny diamond and be like, you want this diamond, you want this key, you want this very shiny coin. This is what you want. This is the most important thing in your life. You need to get this right now. And they need to express that within just a couple of minutes of cutscenes, right? So again, this is another part where I agree with him, but it might just be done on purpose. Like, they have figured out the most optimal way of making you want to pull for these characters, and maybe that part of that is just making them so animated in these cutscenes that, oh my god, look at how fast they are. Look at how, like, this is 100,000 FPS all at the same time is how I would describe it. This is like the highest quality of this sort of animation that you could possibly go for. If you like this type of thing, you got to pull for this character, is how I feel like the kind of sentiment that they're trying to get across with these cutscenes.
A heavily exaggerated and stylized aesthetic, this is over-animation. This is a lot of movement without purpose.
Is it really? For this? For the menu system, I totally disagree. I feel like the animations are totally on point for the menu system.
Style over substance.
Again, this might just be him showing random shots for not a lot of reason, or it might just not even be the most applicable. It not even be the most relevant shot. He could just be showing this because he frankly ran out of footage.
There's a difference between exaggerated acting that conveys genuine emotion and emotional pantomime that merely hits a lot of cute poses along the way. More movement does not always mean better animation. But okay, counterpoint, who cares? You might reasonably ask, why would this matter to anyone other than animation snobs with YouTube channels who make weird choices about how to spend their time on this earth? Well, first of all, hurtful. But second, I do actually think that these issues have a detrimental cumulative effect on Zenless Zone Zero that is worth understanding, especially for anybody wanting to be an animator or make video games. What kinds of problems? Well, problem number one. This over-animation creates noticeable stylistic inconsistency. I've been saying that Zenless Zone Zero has a cartoony, over-the-top animation aesthetic, but that's not really true. The cinematics do, but the rest of the game's animation looks quite different. The combat's anime action probably comes closest, but unless you're seeing a short cinematic, all of the animation in the hub world is pretty chill and contained, about the same as...
I wonder if this guy plays gacha games. You guys probably already know what I'm trying to get at, but he doesn't, right? Sonic, Zelda, Final Fantasy. this guy doesn't play gacha games as much as his Pokemon battle animation. No, I was like thinking Pokemon United, maybe. No, I don't think this guy plays any gacha games. So the point I'm going to make here is that this is another point that I made in probably another part of this video, which is that some of the reasons why the previous animations or works that Zenless is cribbing off of had more stylistic consistency, in which that the vast majority of the animation had a more toned down, low key, emotional feeling, moody aesthetic going for it, might have just been because of technical limitations. And I definitely feel like the fact that this open world environment, these instant environments not being as animated, and this goes for the visual novel talking head sections as well. The way that they're not as animated as the cutscenes is definitely a facet of them being having to work on a production pipeline that is only 6 weeks long. Every single production has to be worked on within a 6 week time limit. I know that's not how it actually works. They probably map things out for over a year or more. They probably know what kind of cutscenes they're going to be working on 3 or 4 patches in advance. So it's not exactly the same thing, but all of these things have to be finalized within a 6 week period, right? So how realistic, in my like, I'm just going to pose the question, how realistic? I don't know what the answer to this question is, so I'm completely working off of a non-insider take here, but how realistic is it that they can make these parts of the game, the visual novel aspects of the game, the open world aspects of the game, have the same degree of animation as the cutscenes, or even just being more animated in general? Like, how much work would it take to give them more poses? Because I've noticed that in these open world sections, they're not open worlds, I'm just using, in these like main hub sections, when you're talking to the characters, sometimes they don't even turn to you. There is very little animation in these main hub sections. Like, you could be talking to someone and you could just be talking their back while a text box is scrolling across, a text is scrolling across the text box at the bottom here. And I find that to be like, it's not ideal. But the moment I realized that this was happening, I just put it down to, oh, this is the production and technical limitations that they are working with. This is what they have chosen to not work as hard on. And this is probably so that they either don't have the budget, they don't have the workforce, or they have chosen to reallocate those resources to the cutscenes rather than this part of the game. The cutscenes and the combat animations, that is what the main part of this game is focusing on. I want there to be in the future some work done on the main hub, in my opinion, that would absolutely make it better. Like, how much work would it really take to just make them turn towards you when you're speaking to them, or open their mouths when they are speaking? I think that would not take too much. But I don't know. I don't know if that is actually the case. And I think what he's saying here is it's true. Like, there is a discrepancy between these sections versus the combat versus the cutscenes. But these are just things that have been the case across all of the gacha games. This has even been the case across JRPGs. Like, in JRPGs, it's not uncommon to have these non-voiced open world sections where the characters are barely animated at all, and then you go into cutscene, it's like the most epic thing of all time. It's like the most Sakuga anime that you could think of. This is not this is not restricted to just Zenless. This is something that happens across most anime games that are going for a more epic art style, a more epic aesthetic during the cutscene moments. And especially the combat, right? The combat is usually when the JRPGs that have this type of combat system are at their most impressive when it comes to gameplay. It's not these talking moments. This is just the excuse for you to get to those moments, essentially. And I wish they did more work on the open world hubs. I wish they did more work on the talking head sections. One of the criticisms I made in the past in one of my videos was that I wish that their mouths would open more and that we could actually see some parts of the tongue. I know that's like a very gross thing to actually say out loud. It feels kind of weird. It's like, what are you into, like tons? No, I'm just saying that it feels more natural for them to open their mouths more when they are saying things in a louder way. So I can definitely see what he's saying here, but at the same time, I'm wondering, is this just another production technical limitation that we are talking about here? And is there a realistic solution to any of this? I don't know. Is this something that can be fixed on a 6-week schedule? I don't know.
As what you'd see in any other MiHoYo game.
So that's why I went over to his YouTube channel and was like, does he know how gacha games work? Like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like, based on his history, that he has ever covered a previous gacha game. Yeah. Like most of the games he's covering, let's be honest, are either JRPGs, and barely at that, it's just Persona and Final Fantasy. And then you have these Sega games like Sonic, and then you have big budget titles like Link that barely has any cutscenes. Anyways, at least the most recent ones, they barely have any cutscenes anymore. It's just open world.
The animation in the conversation sequences almost looks like it was made for an entirely different video game. Not because the characters are holding relatively static poses, that's obviously on purpose, but those poses and expressions are so neutral and reserved by comparison. Nothing at all.
I can immediately tell. So this is the part, yeah, this is definitely the part where he shows that he's not a gacha gamer, because these expressions and these poses they're doing are already 100% better than anything that we have in Honkai Star or Genshin Impact. With maybe the exception of Paimon. I realized that the reason why I feel like Genshin's animations and the talking parts are better than Honkai Star is because Paimon is always just moving around. And then your focus is on Paimon, not the Traveler or any of the other characters. Paimon is basically the one person you are actually like viewing the story of Genshin Impact through. That is your point of view. It's not even the Traveler. You are Paimon.
Nothing at all the way most of these gremlins start behaving when the cinematics hit. And it would be one thing if this enormous difference was being deployed to create dynamic contrast, like keeping the performances and the posing more reserved during lower energy scenes, and then ramping up the exaggerated energy for moments
it's because they want to save on costs. That's the only reason. It's not because they want to get across some kind of emotional effect or portray a certain kind of emotion or behavior. It's literally just because it probably costs too much.
Excitement or tension or comedy, but that's not quite what's happening here. Every one of these sequences, no matter what the energy of the line reads or what is happening in the scene, looks like this.
Going straight forward. Brace for impact.
We're gonna crash! We're gonna crash! We're gonna crash!
Meanwhile, a relatively calm conversation in a cinematic is being animated like this.
Did that hacker's message really come from the hollow?
It's jarring watching a character behave like this for 5 minutes of conversation, and then suddenly be animated like this for 20 seconds, and then go right back
Do you guys really find a problem with this? Maybe I've just been too brainwashed by gacha games that there's no discrepancy here. It's like they're discrete moments. This is the visual novel moment. And then later on, this is the animation moment. Like there's no discrepancy for me. Like I'm just so used to this type of storytelling that I don't feel like there's anything wrong at all. Am I just in so much of a gacha bubble? Because it's not like I only play gacha games, right? I've said that I play Black Myth Wukong. I play the newest Spider-Man games. I play a whole bunch of games. I play strategy games. I play AAA games. Like, maybe I'm just so used to this type of genre and that I separate the different genres so neatly that I can go from one genre that there's one specific way of storytelling, and then I don't see anything wrong with it, and then I go to another game and that genre has a specific type of storytelling, and I'm totally okay with it as well. Maybe I just have no hard opinions. Maybe I'm just like a blank canvas. But this is not something I particularly care about. I can see where he's coming from, though. Again, I wish they would improve on the mouth animations in these cutscenes, but the actual poses themselves, I don't have any problem with. It's like, yes, they do bob and up and down because they have idle animations, but like, is that really that big of a problem? I don't know.
Conversation, and then suddenly be animated like this for 20 seconds, and then go right back to this. It's weird.
This guy's had a complete change of personality.
It's happening all the time. Characters going from this to this, and then right back to this. It feels like some other, more hyperactive character with a completely different personality is just taking control for a second. The character looks the same, they sound the same, but their animated behavior just does not match. Now, again, I do understand that these are intentionally designed to be simpler sequences, which can deliver large quantities of story dialogue in a more budget-friendly way,
yeah.
And that's fine. Zenless is hardly the only game that has to resort to simpler, cost-efficient sequences
knows
to
that
tell
it's a
the bulk
budget
of its
reason.
story. But plenty of the other games that do this have figured out ways to make the animation in those simple sequences and the more robust cutscenes feel like they aesthetically belong together. Heck, in some games, it's very hard to tell which kind of scene is which sometimes.
What?
One of the many responsibilities of an animation lead or an animation director is to guide the aesthetic execution of the project.
Like what, though? Because I'm watching the clips that he's showing here, and I'm not I'm being too harsh. I'm not really seeing it, right? Because the discrepancy here is being shown in Persona 5 as well. And I know that this is a technical limitation because of the era that the game came out in. But while I was playing Persona 5, and I played it pretty late compared to everybody else, I noticed that the 3D models were like way worse than the actual JPEGs that they were showing you during the talking cutscenes. And then he shows Monster Hunter World here as well. And it's just like they're just talking to each other in a circle, the same way that Hawkeye Starro does. Does anybody really care about these types of cutscenes? I certainly didn't. I just wanted to kill monsters in Monster Hunter World. It's just like this just didn't even enter my head. It was like, oh, this is stylistically consistent. Like this absolutely enhances my enjoyment of the game. Versus like if they just did this as well, would this really, if they did this type of cutscene versus this type of cutscene, would it really be that different to you? Like this is almost the exact same thing. I don't see any difference here. And then he shows Witcher 3, and Witcher 3 is a phenomenal game. I love it. But it just doesn't have the same stretch, and like there's no discrepancy here because everything is done in engine. And like they don't try to make the talking sections anything special either. It's just them literally talking to each other
sometimes
face to face.
And
then they do their little idle poses as well. And yes, they do have expressions on their face, but it's much easier to see the expressions feel naturalistic when the actual models are done in a semi-realistic way as well. It's kind of like Elden Ring Skyrim. Elden Ring Skyrim has this uncanny valley feeling with the models because it was released in an era when they didn't have that down yet. Actually, let's be honest, Elden Ring models are just really bad. Even back when they first released, there were better models. I can definitely see what he's talking about because it feels like it's much more easy to see that this is a natural expression versus what Zenless is doing. But at the same time, it's also much easier to like facial motion cap these things versus Zenless because it's not like a one-to-one comparison. Just because you mocap something in Zenless doesn't mean it's going to come across as naturalistic because the models themselves are not naturalistic. They're not human-like. They are like a facsimile of human body shapes, but they are not actually human body like imitative. They're not like 100% the same as a human body. So they will always look off no matter what, unless you make them super animated. And you have to do that by hand. You can't just do it by like the way that her eyebrows move, the way that her eyes move. All of this could just be done by motion cap.
Games, it's very hard
to
tell.
So it's not like the reason why this feels more naturalistic is also just because that's what the entire game feels like. And it's also not something I'm particularly impressed by. It's just kind of there. I like the story of Witcher 3, by the way. It's one of the games that I wish I had finished, but didn't because, things happen.
Very hard to tell which kind of scene is which sometimes.
It's not the reason why that, again, the reason why you don't have to wonder what type of scene is happening because the cutscenes really just don't look that different. I also don't feel that impressed by the Witcher 3 cutscenes because the Witcher 3 cutscenes could be just like another version of. Again, I go back to the comparison between the different Assassin's Creed games. Yes, they all look very cohesive, probably too cohesive. All the Assassin's Creed games start to look like one another after a while, and I just don't value that. This is an extremely subjective analysis of what he's saying, but his own analysis is very subjective as well, so it's just a subjective opinion versus another one. But I just don't value cohesiveness within the same game as well as across multiple different games to be something that is all that worth mentioning, especially in this game market when every single game is more like the other than like all the Ubisoft games are like the other one. All the Final Fantasy games look kind of similar to each other. Even Final Fantasy 16 has more in common with like another Final Fantasy in my opinion than the Hoyoverse games, to be honest. Like Zenless Zone Zero looks more different to me than the other Hoyoverse games than Final Fantasy 16 does to Final Fantasy 15. And everybody loved 16 because it supposedly was so different. Maybe I'm the only odd one out. I don't know. And this one, again, going back to Witcher 3, it looks more similar between the cutscenes, but the cutscenes themselves don't look that, like, they're not that impressive in the first place.
One of the many responsibilities of an animation lead or an animation director is to guide the aesthetic execution of the project, especially if all of your animators are siloed on different teams working on different parts of the game, possibly even in different studios. And I don't know what animation production on this game looks like, but whatever their pipeline, looking at these results, it kind of feels like a fumble happened somewhere.
No, I totally disagree with this section. For me, it's almost like they are trying to give you like an adrenaline pumping hyperactive segment at the end of a gameplay section as almost like this, what do you call it? It is what you are building up towards throughout all of these dialogue options, throughout all of these like storytelling sections. The cutscenes are actually not the primary ways they tell story in these gacha games. It is actually through the dialogue boxes and through the visual novel style sections that they tell the vast majority of the story. The cutscenes are like the culmination of that. So the fact that the cutscenes feel different than all these other different sections is I don't know. This feels, he's right. This video is very nitpicky.
Fumble happened somewhere.
Like it feels on purpose. It feels like they absolutely know that the visual novel sections and the dialogue boxes are what a lot of people are going to be skipping through, and they are literally trying to get towards the gameplay as well as the cutscenes. They are literally skipping the dialogue so that they can get to the hype moments faster. Maybe that is a bad thing, but it's also a cost-saving measure. You know, it's not like it's so hard to say whether or not this is a real problem for me. On one hand, I think in a perfect world, I would love for all the other different sections of the game to be as hype as like the cutscenes, as well animated as this is right here.
Execution.
But how is that going to happen though? Because this is already the most well animated. Zenless Zone Zero is already the most well animated game of this genre, of this gacha anime game genre. Maybe I wish he would just show, like, I know he can't show another gacha game or even just another JRPG that has the same animation style that does what he thinks is better than Zenless. He can't show that because it doesn't exist. So he's showing all of these other games like Witcher 3 and Monster Hunter World. But the problem is that none of these games are it's just that none of them are even doing remotely the same thing as Zenless. So it's like these comparisons don't have as much merit as the points that he's getting across. I wish he would show me. It's obviously that you can't show a game that has the same budget as Zenless because there are no other gacha games with the same budget as Hoyoverse games. So maybe he could show an indie game, an indie gacha game, or just an indie anime game that has what he is talking about, that fixes all of the problems he is saying about Zenless. So it's not like this video is worthless, but it does feel like what I'm asking is, if I was a Zenless animator, what would be my takeaway from watching this video so far? Like, how would I fix this? Would it be worth my time to make the cutscenes less over animated to match the tone and style of the visual novel aspects of the game, at the cost of maybe making them less distinctive compared to the other Hoyoverse titles and other gacha games? Or would I increase the budget of Zenless Zone Zero so to give the animations for the visual novel segments more to feel more like the cutscenes? Obviously, I would like it if they increase the budget to make the other parts of the game feel more animated as well, but it's not at the top of my list for what I want to be fixed for Zenless at the moment. Like, that is very much in like the bottom 10, like maybe like point number 5, 6, 7, or 8 that I would fix with Zenless. Right now, I just want more endgame content. Yeah, it's just more endgame content. I want more casual content as well, repeatable casual content. Maybe something similar to, like, maybe they give us a hotel where we could house our characters. That is basically what I want. I just want more content for Zenless at the moment. And all of the base things that they could fix, they could roll them out over the course of the next year or two, in my opinion. But it's just not at the top of my list of things I would fix about Zenless right now.
Of the project, especially if all of your animators are siloed on different teams working on different parts of the game, possibly even in different studios. And I don't know what animation production on this game looks like, but whatever their pipeline, looking at these results, it kind of feels like a fumble happened somewhere. Problem 2. All this over-animation hinders the game's ability to make these characters feel distinct. There is so much characterization potential to be mined by emphasizing contrast between characters. Like, if you're an animator and you're about to start animating a new character for the first time, you might start your brainstorming process with some really broad questions, like, is this character light or heavy? Are they fast or slow? Are they energetic or lethargic? Are they loud or quiet? Are they thoughtful or brash? You get the idea. And sure, any one of those given traits is pretty broad. It's really just a starting point, but two characters with a very different combination of answers to those questions are likely to be pretty different from each other. And animation can emphasize that in the ways that different characters move, their posing, their attitude, their expressions.
It did feel very weird to me that Ben was so fast in the cutscenes versus all the other characters, because in the combat he's very slow, right? But in the cutscenes he felt like way faster than he was in the combat, and there definitely is a discrepancy there.
And you can see this happening in Zenless Zone Zero to some
And
extent.
I wish he would show that. Does he show that? No. Oh, he does, I think, right over here. But then it's like problem 3 already. He's still on problem 2. I feel like this would have been one of my problems with this video is that he just didn't show the most relevant cutscenes for what he's talking about. Like right here, heavy, slow, lethargic, quite thoughtful. He should have just showed the Bellabot cutscene where Ben is moving super fast, but he doesn't. Instead, he shows this part. And I feel like this part is not very relevant because Ambi and Billy are both very light characters. This guy's very skinny, she's kind of short, and she's also skinny. So the fact that they move very fast and light without any differentiation from each other is not really that notable.
Like, Billy's posing and attitude feel quite different from Anbi's.
Oh, he's using it as a
stern
counterpoint.
poise feels very different from Corin's timid anxiety. But because so many of these characters are over-animated
he
in
does show
similar
it.
ways...
Yeah, this is part I'm talking about. Like he's so fast. Why is he so fast in this cutscene, and then in combat he's like super slow? He's like the slowest character in the game, which makes sense because he's a defensive character. But let's be honest, Caesar King is going to be better than him in defense and still be faster.
During cinematics, it kind of flattens
Yeah,
that
this is the
range
part
of
I'm talking
contrast
about.
potential. Are there subtle distinctions to be made in the body language and the animated energy of characters like Nicole, Nekomata, and Grace? Yeah, definitely to some degree. But in practice, those differences are not nearly as noticeable as the contrast between these characters and themselves in cinematics. Which brings me to problem 3. For all of their exaggeration, these over-animated performances are failing to give any of these characters genuine depth. By investing so many
I
resources...
will say though, the part where he says that these characters don't, like, the way that they're all so bouncy, like, I guess that's what he's talking about, which is that the over animatedness doesn't give proper, like, deference to what they actually look like. This is much less of a problem if you consume media about these characters outside of just the game, right? Because a lot of these gacha games, right, if you go to like Zenless Zone Zero, if you go to the Zenless main channel, you see all of these different animations, and you see all of these characters being represented in not just the animation style that is in the game, but all these different animations. Like we already have another Jane Doe character short animation. We've got Jane Doe here in 3D. We've got Jane Doe here in another 2D animation. They get much more differentiated portrayals within these trailers than in the actual game themselves. And I feel like the game definitely prioritizes making them as hyper and over top as humanly possible. But when you look at like this Qingyi trailer, she obviously is very differentiated compared to what she looks like in the game compared to all the other characters. Even in the game, Qingyi definitely feels a bit more robotic. Her animations are a bit more brisk. And it's like she goes from one pose to another immediately after one. Like her poses are very static and then they go very fast and then they go very static. I don't know if you have noticed this, but that's something like there is one animation, I think it's her dodge, where she will just go on her back feet and stand in a very straight pose. And then she will immediately transform from that to a very animated one. And I think that is an animation that is specific to Qingyi that is not seen on other characters. But again, that is only something that you see inside of the fighting animations. And then you also see different portrayals of her here and then here. So it's definitely not as big of a problem once you consume all of the media about these characters. And I think that is something specific to gacha games where that is so expected of you that you're consuming all of this external media from the YouTube, from Bilibili and all these other places compared to just the game itself. Because let's be honest, most of the artworks that you're seeing from these characters are not actually from the games. It's from fan art, it's from Rule 34, it's from fan animations and fan fiction. So he does have a point. I agree with the fact that Ben being so animated and so light does not gel with how he looks. And it doesn't get across what his personality should be based on the natural proportions that he is given.
Pretty broad. similar ways during cinematics, it kind of
And it
flattens
doesn't
that
differentiate him from the other characters the way that he should have been.
range of contrast potential. Are there subtle distinctions to be made in the body language and the animated energy of characters like Nicole, Nekomata, and Grace? Yeah, definitely, to some degree. But in practice, those differences are not nearly as noticeable as the contrast between these characters and themselves in cinematics. Which brings me to problem 3. For all of their exaggeration, these over-animated performances are failing to give any of these characters genuine depth. By investing so many resources into animation, Zenless Zone Zero has the opportunity to make its characters so much more compelling than those found in other gacha games, because animation can show you so much more about a—
They are more compelling than in other gacha games, in my opinion. But almost all of the storytelling, again, doesn't actually come through in these cutscenes. They are a supplement. These cutscenes are like extremely compelling supplements to the main story. It's just that the main story, unlike most AAA action combat games these days, like God of War, for example, I really like the first God of War. I watched the second one being played by Maximilian Dude, so I basically watched the entire thing. I don't really need to play it anymore. That's just how I work it. I feel like I've played the game through watching other people play the game. All of these games have, like, God of War in particular has only one camera angle, so the entire story is told through one perspective that changes, that never changes, but it shifts across the game, and that is extremely impressive. And I can see what he's talking about through God of War, and not Witcher 3. I think Witcher 3 is not as well, but basically what he's talking about is that it's not really like the story itself for these characters are not being expressed through the cutscenes and given depths that they need through these cutscenes, because most of the actual depth comes from the dialogue. You know, it comes from what you're learning about Kalita during the quest, right? That when she talks about her father, when the comics book section happens, when the comic book section shows that Kalita is being abandoned by her father during the cutscene. Not really cutscene, it's like the comic book panel section between Anton and during the show where Anton is discussing all the intricacies, well, not really intricacies, but he's debating with the other side, the Vision Corporation, on the kids talk show. That is when Anton expresses the vast majority of his character, right? The depth of his character, I mean. The cutscenes show how animated he is and how hyper he is, and sometimes how he interacts with the other characters. But those don't actually get into the depths of their character story. The character story are almost entirely told within other sections of the gameplay. And the cutscenes just don't do that. The cutscenes are absolutely 100% supposed to be the most hype things of all time at the end of a story or gameplay section. They are not the entirety of the story themselves.
Genuine depth. By investing so many resources into animation, Zenless Zone Zero has the opportunity to make its characters so much more compelling than those found in other gacha games, because animation can show you so much more.
And one of the things I said in my previous videos was that these characters are more compelling because there are more Persona 5 like relationship sequences with them. They have these visual novel talking style, visual novel interactions that happen at certain points during your relationship upgrade system. But again, those aren't the cutscenes that he's talking about.
More about a character, their behavior, their body language, the ways they visually express or try to hide.
I forgot his name, but I do think this character in general. Oh my god, I'm having so many brain farts. I know his name, but I can't remember it right now. This character, it actually does animate a little bit differently than the other ones I've noticed. He is much more still, much more static, and then he flows into his animations in a more graceful fashion that is not as abrupt compared to the other characters.
Their emotions, but because these performances are leaning so hard on tropes and over-animated cliches, all their acting is really able to emphasize is which familiar archetypes each character is derived from, which is fine, but it means that their animations not providing them nearly as much personality as it could, isn't able to elevate them beyond that surface impression you get the first time you see them. See,
I do think that Jane is an exception to this. Jane, for me, goes a little bit beyond the archetype at the end of her story during the cutscene where she's helping out and explaining all the reasons why she actually helped Seth. I think that was a standout moment where we got to see more of her character beyond just the archetype of the femme fatale. It still fits within that archetype, but it just gives her a little bit more of that That's not just, oh, she's an action girl who moves very fast and hits very hard.
Elevate them beyond that surface impression you get the first time you see them. See, the problem with acting cliches is that they're superficial. They're obvious. They're predictable. And good animated acting can deliver so much more than that. The illusion of life that we animators are always going on about isn't just about taking a non-living object like a digital model or a drawing or a physical puppet and making them move around almost like living things do. That's part of it, but the real illusion of life happens when you can make that object express an emotion that actually feels sincere, where the artifice of it all just fades into the background, and in that moment, the people watching don't see a puppet or a moving drawing anymore, but an actual living character looking back at them through the screen, with thoughts of their own and feelings and desires.
This Summer Wars?
A living, breathing character. That
or is this
the illusion.
Digimon?
That's the
this
magic
either looks like
animators
Summer
are
Wars or
always striving
Digimon.
to capture. Now, is it some dire failing that Zenless Zone Zero's character animation doesn't often achieve that? No. Frankly, a lot of game animation doesn't. But it is a bigger missed opportunity for any game that's built around the appeal of its cast. Even more so for a game that's literally trying to monetize that cast's desirability. Okay, but what if, after listening to all of that from me, what if you still feel like, well, I still like it. I think it's good. That is okay. I've been doing a lot of nitpicking here, but while I do genuinely think that the animation in this game's cinematics has some significant shortcomings, you are not wrong, or an idiot, or anything if you like this. In fact, I guarantee you, there are at least a couple professional animators who are very good at their job watching this who agree with you and think that my criticisms of this are absurd. Animation is an art that has been explored and refined for more than a century at this point, but when it comes to aesthetic critiques like these, subjective tastes are still genuinely a variable that you have to factor in. But if you are an animator, or if you aspire to be someday, I would strongly encourage you to not be too quick to write off these sorts of criticisms as mere differences in stylistic taste. There is a reason why so many veteran animators around the world have spent so much time and so much effort trying to help younger animators recognize over-animation in their own work. Because animation that moves in cool, eye-catching ways is awesome, but great character animation is about so much more than that and can achieve so much more than that. And recognizing this is an important step in pushing your craft to the next level as an animator. Stylish over-animation can do a lot of things. It can make combat flashy, it can make fight cutscenes exciting, and it can make characters look attractive. But it's not very useful for creating that illusion of life, for animating a performance that feels genuine and real, the kind an audience will emotionally connect with and get invested in and remember for years. In fact, if creating that emotional connection is your goal, then the pursuit of style for style's sake is gonna undermine your efforts every single time. Look, I am not trying to convince you that this doesn't look cool. It absolutely does. But appealing motion and style alone aren't enough to breathe real life into an animated character, to elevate them beyond the stock archetype and cute design they started as. All of that said, there is very clearly a lot of talent working on this team, and the animation in MiHoYo's games has gotten better and better every year. I think Zenless Zone Zero's animation still has a lot of room to improve, but this game is going to keep growing, and one nice thing about working on a live service game is that every new character and content update is an opportunity to raise the bar a little higher. And I hope they do, because as cool as this game's animation already looks,
I definitely feel like the recent Jane Doe cutscenes were better than the ones in Chapter 3, or am I wrong in that? I personally feel like that's true. I think Jane Doe acts in a more, not maybe naturalistic way, but a much more toned down and focused way. Because maybe that's just because there are less characters on the screen, like I said before. The fact that there are less characters on the screen makes the over-animated nature of Zenless cutscenes and Zenless characters much more palatable and digestible compared to if there were 4 characters all doing over-the-top things at the same time.
There's a lot more potential still buried in this cast, just waiting to be let out. Even more than usual, I would like to sincerely thank you for listening to my animator rambling. I'm always a little nervous getting this deep into the weeds on aesthetic critique on this channel. Even if you don't agree with me, I hope that this was at least interesting. And if it wasn't interesting, then I hope it at least made sense. God, I hope this made sense.
It does.
You know, whatever, I got a very large video I'm still working on. I need to get back to it. I'll see you guys later. Bye!
Oh, that was a pretty good video. But I feel like this video kind of... It doesn't resonate me on a deep level because, again, I am a Hoyo show. I'm going to protect Hoyoverse at all costs. No, that's not true. I actually just like Zenless a lot. But one of the things that really like doesn't speak to me about this video is that, one, this guy is just not a gacha gamer, right? This guy is just, based on what we know about the info here, about his community posts, I don't see anything Elden Ring, Final Fantasy. This guy is just not a gacha gamer. So I'm assuming, based on what he has released so far, this is the first gacha game that he has released. He probably has no idea that Hoyoverse games were like the way that Zenless Zone Zero does its storytelling is the exact same as Honkai Impact Third, right? They have the visual novel segments, or at least judging by part two, it's part two of Honkai Impact Third. It's almost all visual novel segments, and then followed by a bit of gameplay. If you like, gameplay is maybe being a bit too generous. But after the talking segments, then there comes the cutscene. And the cutscenes, Hoyoverse absolutely can do these low tone, low key, very emotional impact cutscenes where there are very little animations. Like Graduation for Honkai is one of those cutscenes. Graduation Trip, there's almost no high action cutscenes. It's all just these very evocative, emotional, high impact shots that are referencing things that happened in the past. You've got Kiana on a train touching the glass. You've got Auto Apocalypse. You've got I think this is the Hersher of something, Hersher of the Mind, I believe. I don't know. I don't know that much about Honkai Impact Third lore, to be honest, but I've seen all the cutscenes and I know what he's getting at. And I think that Honkai Impact Third actually achieves what this person is talking about more so than Zenless Zone Zero. That's why I don't actually think that the part where the limits of this video when it comes to how relevant it is, in my opinion, kind of falls apart when you realize that Hoyoverse has already achieved what he is talking about in numerous other animations and cutscenes. Like these parts, this isn't even a cutscene. These are just JPEGs, but it's literally no action whatsoever. The focus is very clear. You can see that everybody here is just kind of like interacting with each other in a very, like, you get a much more of a sense of their characters in these parts of the story, in these parts of the cutscenes, than in Zenless Zone Zero. And the reason why that is because this is probably like, from what I know, this is like the end of part one of Honkai Impact Third. This is where Kiana says goodbye to everybody. So obviously it's going to be a very impactful, emotional moment versus all the cutscenes that he shows in Zenless Zone Zero, which are, let's be frank, they're just rewards that you get at the end of, let's say, 30, 40 minutes. If I'm being generous, 30 to 40 minutes of gameplay. On average, you get maybe 30 to 40 minutes of gameplay and talking sections. And then you get one of these cutscenes. And these cutscenes have to be, like, I wouldn't say have to be, there can be exceptions, but for the most part, they are just high octane, adrenaline rushing, blood pumping, heart stopping cutscenes, animations that are supposed to be all action. That's why you hardly get any non-action cutscenes that he's showing here. It would be hard for him to show them because there aren't that many. I think the only ones are at the very beginning, during the interactions between Wise and Bell. In fact, almost all the non-action cutscenes are between Wise and Bell. And that is the only time you will get more low-key toned down moments. And even then he says that they're not that great because they still have the same overacted, over-animated aspects as the action cutscenes. But even then I would say that there are just not enough of those moments in general for you to make a case. So to return to this, I can see what he's talking about. I can see the points that he's making, but when you put them all together, I feel like this video would have been a lot more effective if he actually showed a comparison between Zenless Zone Zero and another gacha game, or just another anime JRPG style aesthetic game that is doing what he is proposing better than Zenless Zone Zero does. That is always the case with any of these, like, these video essays doing critiques or arguments, right? You gotta show what is the alternative. And right now, there is not really an alternative. Like he says, Zenless Zone Zero is pushing the boundaries of animations, and I hope that it does improve in the future. But because this is currently the boundary of what gacha anime JRPGs are at, there's not really any alternative. It's like what other game is doing it better than Zenless Zone Zero, right? He's showing all these different mediums, and the like. This is a movie. I think this is the end of Evangelion. And then he's showing another movie, The Silence. I've watched this manga. I've read this manga, but I haven't watched the movie. But this is basically about a deaf girl. It's about a deaf girl coming to terms with her bullying, and then the bully trying to. It's a drama romance film, guys. This is a drama romance film. You're going to get more emotional, low key, impact moments from this film than at any part of the movie compared to at any point. Even the most emotionally impactful non-action oriented cutscenes in Zenless Zone Zero, it will never match up to this film, because this is a completely different genre. This is a completely different platform that they are working with. This is a movie, this is an anime. They have 1 to 2 hours worth of time to get across these characterization moments that Zenless Zone Zero cutscenes don't have, because all of the characters have to express literally everything that they are within those very small tidbits that they are given. So is this a bad critique? I don't think it is, but I think it would have been more effective if we were like 2 or 3, 4 years down the line and there were a whole bunch of games that were mimicking Zenless Zone Zero, and it has become incredibly nauseating in terms of how overwhelming this art style has become. But it hasn't reached that point yet. I don't have to go like find in the corner of the world somewhere a game that doesn't look like Zenless Zone Zero, that does something that is different from Zenless. So it's like he's trying to head off the animation industry for games heading in that direction. And I think that is worthwhile, but it just hasn't reached that point yet. So this video doesn't resonate with me as much as it should have, because I do see that the individual points he has merit. The way that Ben is animated is not that great in terms of how it's supposed to get across his size and weight. The way that the visual novel talking head sections are just, they're not that great because the mouth barely move. And even the other things he says about the idle poses, I don't think that that's too big of a problem. I think the idle poses are actually better than the other gacha games so far, especially compared to Honkai Star Rail. But compared to like mainstream games that are not gacha games, they are definitely lacking. It's just not something I think is like, is this the problem that needs to be solved immediately for Zenless Zone Zero? Not really. There are much bigger problems. I think this is absolutely serviceable for a visual novel style gacha game, which is how the story is being primarily told through these cutscenes and through the comic book sections in Zenless Zone Zero. So I think this was definitely a worthwhile video. I'll give him a subscribe and a like, and I'll link this in the bottom section in the YouTube blurb. So if you enjoyed that, then make sure to give this guy a like and a subscribe. But we'll just have to see how the gaming industry pans out, because if it turns out that all these other gacha games, and I'm already seeing this happen, I've already seen like Genshin Impact and Honkai Star having characters and regions that mimic the style of Zenless Zone Zero. So maybe in the future, the gacha games will all be like in the same style as Zenless Zone Zero. Maybe this is so effective that everybody else copies this like over the top animation style. But until then, Zenless Zone Zero is particularly unique among gacha games at the moment, and I value that more than Zenless Zone Zero fulfilling a criteria for what exactly is the best kind of animation across all different sectors of animation as a genre. Especially when you're comparing this game to Monster Hunter World, it's not a really valid comparison in my opinion. Witcher 3, even Persona 5. I feel like the animation I definitely prefer the animation in Zenless Zone Zero and even the gameplay compared to Persona 5. I know a lot of people have nostalgia for that game, but if you go back and play it right now, take off the nostalgia goggles. The dialogue isn't as good as it seemed at the time when you were playing it during your when you were 16 years old back in high school, or you're just like a freshman in university, you're like 18 years old and you have no idea what is going on in life. The story it's okay. I'll just say that the animation style is definitely it was of its era. Anyways, this is Bench Gamer signing out. This video has been very long. My mom is going out to buy something. Hopefully she gets sushi, so when she comes back, I have something to eat. Anyways, this is Bench Gamer signing out. I'll see you guys sometimes. Bye-bye.